Hello, welcome. We are here for my November wrap-up. November did not go according to plan reading-wise, but I will talk about that at the end because I know not everyone really cares. But the first book that I finished in November was Anne of Green Gables, but I was listening to the audiobook in Spanish. So recently I have been really enjoying kind of taking advantage of Spanish as a vehicle to reread books that I have been wanting to reread for a long time, but maybe haven't made the time to do. And so one of those was Anne of Green Gables. I will put the audiobook that I listened to on the screen. I don't recommend this specific audiobook because it is not really edited like it was, but it seems like it was maybe automatically edited, or the person editing didn't pay any attention or something. Like if he read a sentence and then realized that he could have said it better, so he said it over again. Those were all in the audiobook, which was a little bit weird, but I absolutely loved rereading this book. I have always been a big fan of the Anne of Green Gables series, but, sometimes if you haven't reread something as an adult, you're not really sure how you're going to feel about it rereading it. So I was a little bit worried going into this, but I absolutely loved it. Honestly, maybe even liked it better than I did when I was a kid. Anne is just such an incredible character, one of the greatest characters of all time, in my opinion, and everything about it was just so heartwarming and endearing, but without being cheesy or over the top. All of the characters are so funny, and you can understand all of their motivations so well, and yeah, I just can't recommend it enough. Absolutely love Anne of Green Gables, and I can't wait to continue rereading them. Unfortunately, I don't seem to have any of the audiobooks in Spanish in any of the apps that I use for audiobooks beyond the first one. So they are online, on YouTube and stuff, but that's hard to listen to on the go. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult, I think, to continue listening, but I definitely want to. And continuing on with the classics rereading, I listened to the first half of Little Women. So the audiobook that I was using, which by the way is great, split these into two parts. Little Women was originally published in two parts. I believe the first part was just called Little Women, and then the second part was called Good Wives. Most modern editions do include both, but this particular audiobook was split in half, so I've only listened to the first half, and this was one that I did not like quite as much as I did when I was a kid. I did not dislike it, but you can tell that she was writing greatly under kind of the constraints of her time. And so it is very, very moralistic, very preachy, which, is fine, but it was at times not super enjoyable. And what kind of made me sad, honestly, rereading this is how blatantly, obviously queer Jo March is, and how much she is not able to live her desired, true self. And that was just really sad. I mean, I already knew that going into it, and I think that that's a very common, headcanon thing that people know and understand about these books. And I think there are theories as well that Louisa May Alcott herself was potentially non-binary, etc. But, to me, reading this is very obvious that Jo is non-binary or trans or, gender non-conforming in some way, and also potentially ace, aromantic, those kind of, other identities as well. And, she's being very much forced into conventional womanhood, and I haven't even read the second half of the book, where that happens even more so. So I do think that that will make me very sad, but nonetheless, I do think that this is worth the read if just to experience the characters. These are very, very rich, sister characters that have great relationships and interactions with each other, not always getting along by any stretch, but they, love each other so much, and their parents and their friends, and is very endearing as well. So I do think that I will finish this as well. I will probably listen to the second half at some point, but I'm not super motivated to, knowing how sad it's going to be. Then, super random, I read this little tiny graphic novel called Diana and Nubia, Princesses of the Amazons, and I actually read this in a comic book store while my partner was looking at comics, and I just read it front to back. So in this story, Diana is a child, and there are no other children in the Mascara or whatever that's called, and she has always wished that she had a playmate or a sister or someone. She kind of makes a wish and ends up with a sister, and they each remember their lives being only children, but everybody else around them remembers them always being both there. And so they have to figure out what's going on with that, and they keep fighting and, wanting all of their parents' attention because they've never had to be a sibling before. And it was very cute. Then I finished The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, and I loved this. It was just as good as everybody says it is. So interesting. I don't want to provide too much information about this because I think it's always best to go into kind of thriller, horror type books not knowing a ton, but amusingly, I actually was almost completely correct in what I thought this book was about, and I thought that I was going to be very, very wrong, but just kind of from the cover and things people have said about it, I did pretty much know exactly what it was going to be about. There are 4 Blackfeet men who grew up together and were friends throughout their whole lives, and they kind of are involved in something of questionable morality when they are young men, I believe, and they have to kind of pay for that throughout their lives, and it is very, very interesting, a very engaging style of storytelling. He has kind of an informal voice, I would say, and so you really feel like you are, engaging with the characters on a very personal level. There were definitely sections that were kind of gruesome or scary, and I think it makes sense for this to be classified as horror, but I would say it's also fairly friendly to people who maybe don't normally read horror. It also is sometimes quite funny. It's definitely one of those books that kind of has everything, if that makes sense. Definitely plan to read probably everything else that Stephen Graham Jones has written and does write. Next, I finished El Silencio de la Ciudad Blanca, Silence in the White City. This has been translated into English. It was originally written in Spanish by an author from Spain, from the Basque Country region. There is a lot of inclusion of kind of Basque mythology and history. This is a thriller mystery following a detective named Unai who is investigating a case of serial murder. So essentially there was a serial killer who was killing victims in a very, very specific, ritualized way 20 years ago. And they caught that killer. He's been in prison this whole time. He is about to be released, but the killings have recommenced in almost exactly the same way. And so now they have to figure out whether they were wrong all along about who the killer was, or whether it's a copycat or someone that the killer is controlling from inside. The actual mystery aspect of this I thought was very interesting, and I thought it was pretty well done as far as I could tell. The characters, however, I don't know if I liked a single character in this book, maybe one, but yeah, they do the dumbest things. There are so many terrible personal decisions made in this book for basically completely incomprehensible reasons, and did not enjoy that aspect of it at all. And unfortunately, they did spend kind of a fair amount of time on that, but it was still a good read. It was worth the read. It is, a pretty long, adult novel, and I haven't read a ton of those in Spanish, so it was good to read something like that. I do own the next 2 books in the series, so I will be continuing the series, I think, hopefully the personal decisions of the detective become a little bit less questionable, but we shall see. I read The Little Prince in 3 languages this month. In English, a reread. I did read it in French, and I also read it in Spanish. I was attempting to read it in 4 languages this month. I'm also reading it in German, but I haven't finished yet. I am a complete beginner in French, so I understood very little in French, but it was still fun to try, and, I think that I learned a fair amount just from reading it, but this is obviously a very, very famous book, and I think that it is very cute. I don't think I feel the same way about it that some people feel about it. It's not, life-altering to me. I don't want to read it, once a year or anything like that. I know that some people really, really love this and reread it very regularly. I just think it's cute. I like the little illustrations. I like the discussion of how grown-ups lose a lot of, the magic of life and put importance on kind of the wrong things, although, sometimes it's not a choice, you have to, but, I like it. I like the messages. After now reading it this many times, in a month, I'm going to be set for the foreseeable on that one, though. I read El Tejedor de Pesadillas, which is the Weaver of Nightmares. This is the second book in the Los Dioses del Norte series, and this was really fun. This is a middle grade fantasy novel. In our world, there used to be magic, but it has had to be kind of split off into a separate world where it is always dark, but they have magic, or you can be in our world where, it's days and nights, but there's no magic. So we're following 3 cousins who had no idea that this world existed until they stumbled upon it in the last book. And in this book, the portal between the worlds is kind of cracked or broken in some way, and so they're not being kept as separate as they are supposed to be. I did enjoy this. The villain in this book, though, to me, had a really good point. So I'm hoping that they explore that more in future books. Essentially, his argument is that all of the other creatures, the magical creatures, had to be sequestered in this world where it's always night because of the things that the magical humans did. And so why are they being, punished for something that they had nothing to do with? I think that it could be a really good discussion of human impact on the world if they choose to go that route with it. If they do not, I will be a little bit disappointed, but also I understand it's middle grade. But anyway, I finished the audiobook of Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. This is a book that I have wanted to read for a long time. This is a nonfiction book. It's really mostly, I would say, a memoir. I loved the memoir aspect of it. I was not that into the psychological aspect. So Viktor E. Frankl is a concentration camp survivor, and so he talks about, life in the camps, but then specifically how it impacts your mind. He was a psychologist or a psychotherapist before going into the concentration camps and obviously after, and so he was kind of, primed to notice the effects that level of suffering for over such a long period had on people's minds and behavior. And so it was very, very interesting and obviously heartbreaking to hear all of the ways in which people coped, both positively and negatively. And, to me, it was all very much understandable. I don't think that there was anything surprising to me. But anyway, loved that section. Obviously very, very sad, but well worth the read. The psychology stuff, afterwards, he founded a type of psychotherapy or something like that called logotherapy, and I didn't care, I'm not gonna lie, it didn't catch my interest. I was tuning it out almost the entire time. I would have to focus so hard to pay any attention. To me, it was just not gripping, that part, at all. So I don't know, maybe I'll give it another try at some point, but I do think that the book is well worth the read. It's very short, and yeah. Then I read Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby, and I loved this book. Loved it. I read this all in one day, like practically all in one sitting. Incredible. This is kind of a thriller-ish book. It is the story of two men who are both ex-convicts. One is black and one is white, and they had sons who were married to each other. And their sons were killed in what seems like a hit for completely unknown reasons. And so both of these men who did not know each other previously and did not have great relationships with their sons decide to figure out what happened to the sons, because the police really don't seem to have really any leads, and it seems like this is just going to fall, through the cracks unless they take action. So these men who have kind of rough pasts, but specifically one of them has completely left that behind, they kind of dig that part of themselves back up and go after the truth and, justice, if that could be what you call it. So it's about them, messing up a lot of people, but also them dealing with their failures as fathers, the fact that they did not accept their sons for who they were. Yeah, I cried like 5 times reading this. I do cry while reading, though. That's not, unheard of for me, but so good. If you want a hard-hitting thriller, you cannot go wrong, I don't think, here. Definitely be prepared for a lot of violence, a lot of very explicit, racism, etc. But man, I already want to reread it, and I will be reading everything that he has written and everything that he does write. So I read Chronicle of a Death Foretold in English and Spanish. I struggled to motivate myself to read these all month long, and then like 2 days ago I was like, you are doing it. You are finishing these this month. We are not carrying these into December. So I did it. These are very short. There's like 120 pages. So as the title would suggest, this is the story of a murder that takes place where everyone in this little town knew that this man was going to be murdered before it happened. And somehow, still, with all of these people knowing and all of this build up to it, no one was able to or chose to or believed that it was going to happen or whatever in order to prevent it. It was a very strange book. It's told in a very almost whimsical style, like it's almost told like a fable or something like that. So our narrator is a person who lives in the town. So he's kind of collecting all these pieces of knowledge and all these things that happened from everyone around the town to put together this whole timeline, and also an explanation of the motive for the murder, which in and of itself is an extremely odd thing and has a lot of potential social commentary about sexism, about like machismo, ownership of women, and it was very strange reading these because it felt like something that should have been set a very long time ago, but it's not. There's like cars and stuff. That's also partially me looking at it from, a very US American lens. It was a very interesting read. I will need more time to formulate like a feeling about it, about whether I liked it or didn't like it. This was not a good way to read it, for one thing. I do think that I should have read it in English first and then read it in Spanish later. I tried to read one chapter at a time in each because I'm kind of trying to see how it works best for me to read things and that was not the way to do it because it felt like laborious, you know. But this is a very, very difficult book to read in Spanish. I was forewarned of that, but I still wanted to try it, and I am glad that I did try it. And lastly, I just finished the audiobook Lies She Told by Kate Olahan today at work, and this is not a good book. It's not, and it's not even a not good book in like a fun way, you know? I'm trying to see if I can get back into audiobooks in English because I can listen to them sometimes while I'm working, whereas Spanish ones, I cannot do that yet. So I was like, well, I'll just try like a thriller, something easy. So I just picked one off of my library that looked interesting. So we are following a novelist who is working on a deadline to finish her next thriller novel, and meanwhile her husband's business partner has gone missing, and so the police are investigating. Her partner's, or her husband is freaking out, blah blah blah. Premise sounds interesting, whatever. It's actually a dual perspective story, but one of them is her novel, so you're reading her novel while she's writing it, essentially. And the novel has a very, very similar story to her story. So a lot of people in the reviews were talking about how confusing it is to have such similar stories like told right together. And sometimes it was, but I didn't find it too confusing. I just kind of found it boring. Like, we're spending a lot of time in what you know is a novel that she's writing, and it's like, why are we spending almost half of our time in this novel? So, it was kind of slow but okay up until about like the 75% mark, and I was already suspicious about where it was going to go, and then the like plot twist was a bad idea, and it was a poorly executed bad idea, and I just nope. I was annoyed that I had spent my time on it, but I guess it doesn't matter because I wasn't going to be listening to any other audiobooks probably either. Not something I recommend. It was not worth the read on literally any level. So that is everything that I read this month. I am in the middle of some other books that I'm really, really enjoying, but what happened this month was I had such a good reading month in October, and so I went into this month, I think, very confident that it was going to go really smoothly, but what I failed to account for was that I was reading whatever the hell I wanted in October, and most of it was like super readable, super like surface level stuff. I did have some literary things in there, but I was reading a lot of like thrillers or fantasy or whatever. And I had mentioned that I was, not having the best mental health time, and so this month I go in and I start reading like 4 literary books, most of which involve a fair amount of trauma, and I just got bogged down like instantly. After I finished The Only Good Indians, I didn't finish anything for like over a week, and then some of my books needed to go back to the library, and I wasn't even close to finishing any of them, and so I started to feel just kind of bogged down and bummed out, and I felt bad that there were all these amazing books that I do want to read and I really do think are well worth the time, more worth the time than most of the things I ended up reading this month, but I just felt like I wasn't able to give them the attention that they deserved because of my, state of mind, and so I just kind of went scorched earth and I returned everything to the library. I just quit everything, and I'm just going to pick them back up as I have like the time and mental and emotional availability to do so. That was when I got this and a couple other books that I'm currently reading just as kind of a super readable things. So I am still reading Staying Alive, which was the nonfiction book that I really, really wanted to finish last month, and I am still reading This Accident of Being Lost, which was one of my Indigenous reads as well. My other thriller that I wanted to read, Murder on Red River or something like that, still has not come in from the library, so that one will be coming in eventually as well. So anyway, I have just kind of let myself off the hook for the rest of the year on any you should be reading this ideas. Not that all of that needed explained, but I just feel bad when I bail on really, really good books that deserve all of the attention and should be read and will be read. So anyway, that's all I've got. So I will see you in the next video.